Hi everyone and welcome to our Harvest Assembly. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but unfortunately I've not been very well. And because I didn't really want to miss out on this, I've sent you this to help you celebrate. Now, I want to split this assembly into two parts. The first part is looking at why do we celebrate harvest? Well, it's a time to give thanks to God for the harvest that the farmers have brought in and for the food that we can eat, but as well as giving thanks to God for all creation around us. So I wanted to start with this. Does anybody know what this is? If you can see that. If you can see. Looks like seeds, but it's actually wheat. And what you do with the wheat is you grind it, and it takes quite a long time, I can tell you, because we tried this the other day in one of the other schools, and we spent most of the day on and off trying to grind wheat, grind it into flour, and we only just managed to produce the smallest amount in the bottom. So it's amazing how much it does, but it produces flour, like so. Now, the biggest thing that we use flour for, apart from others, is making bread. And bread is a really important part of church services. So we have it at the Last Supper, and we have it at something called Passover, and it was unleavened bread, so we didn't use yeast. And also, if you remember the lovely story of the feeding of the 5,000, where the little boy shared his loaves and fish. So bread is mentioned quite a lot in the Bible, so it's actually quite important. But what I want to look at is actually how much work it takes into going to make a loaf of bread. As I say, we have to take the grains and we then have to grind them into flour. We then have to spend a lot of time having to knead it, mix all the ingredients together, knead it all down, and then we have to let the yeast work, so it has to prove, so it has to sit there for quite some time before we can then bake it, before we can get our loaf of bread. If we go back even further than that, we have to plant the seeds. So the farmers will go out, they will plough all the land to make sure that you have the finest soil. They then plant all the seeds, and they then tend and look after them. But we need two other ingredients to actually make our wheat, to be able to create our bread. And that is sunshine and rain. And so what we're also doing when we're celebrating our harvest is giving thanks to God for the weather that we have, the sunshine and the rain that helps all our crops grow. Now, I want to look at a Bible story which Jesus tells about sowing seeds. And it's actually the parable of the sower. Now, I know we have done this before, so it's a bit of a recap for some of you, but actually it fits in really well with the stories that we want to follow. So we're going to watch that one now.
This is another story that Jesus told, and this one is about a farmer. It goes something like this. Jesus had gone out and sat next to the lake by himself. Soon such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat near the shore, and people stood on the land to hear him. Then he began telling them parables. A farmer went out to plant crops in his field. As he was throwing seeds on the ground, some fell onto the hard path nearby, and the birds came and ate them. The next seeds fell on the hard ground full of rocks. The seeds started to grow, but there wasn't enough soil. When the sun came out, they withered and died because they couldn't get enough water. The farmer continued to throw seeds onto the ground, and some of the seeds fell among the weeds and the thorns at the side of the field. As the seeds grew, the thorns grew around them, and the sunlight couldn't get through, and slowly the plants died. But finally some seeds fell on the good soil that had been ploughed. Those seeds grew into plants, and the farmer was able to harvest them for food. People asked Jesus what this story meant, so he told them. It's a bit like us. If we listen to a Bible story, we don't understand. If we don't ask, we will forget, so like the seeds that the birds ate, it will be gone. But if we understand, but don't find out more about God, It's like the seeds that falls onto the rocky ground. We like the story, but after a while it won't grow and dies. If we spend time worrying about things and not talking to God, our worries overtake us. We lose the message God is telling us. Then we end up like the seeds that were overrun with weeds. But the last seed is the best one. We hear the story, and we want to know more, and to love God. It is like the seeds that fall onto the good soil. We let it grow within us. We need to be like the seeds that fall onto the good soil, to know that Jesus loves us, and to let that love keep growing in everything we do.
So, a bit like our loaf of bread, from making the flour from the wheat, right through to being able to eat our loaf of bread, we have to be patient and work towards the final reward. Jesus wants us to know and to understand him, and this also takes time and patience and hard work. But he will be with us the whole way. The second part I want to look at is looking at God's creation. We have the most beautiful world, but bit by bit it is disappearing. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, but I don't want you to put your hands up and I don't want you to answer. This is just something I want you to think about. How many of you have ever dropped a piece of rubbish and not picked it up, even if it was accidentally? Maybe it blew away in the wind, or maybe you just couldn't be bothered to go to the bin and you just dropped it on the floor. What happens if everybody does that? What happens when we cut down trees or we pollute the seas and the air? Bit by bit, our world changes. But what can we do to look after God's world? We may think there's too much for us to do and that we would never make a difference. But I want you to listen to this story. One evening, a man was walking along a beach when he spotted a young boy down on the shore. The man noticed that the beach was littered with hundreds and hundreds of starfish that had all been washed up after a storm. The starfish were now stranded with no hope of being able to return to the sea. As the man watched the boy, he noticed him picking up one of the starfish one at a time and throwing them back into the sea. Well, the man was a bit puzzled by this. How did the boy think he could help by throwing back one starfish at a time when there were so many starfish that needed saving? It was an impossible task. The man walked across to the sand to meet the boy. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Saving the starfish," the boy replied. "But how can you?" the man responded. "There are so many here to save. What difference can you make?" The boy picked up a starfish lying close to his feet and threw it back into the sea. As the starfish splashed into the water, the boy said, "Well, I made a difference to that one." God's world needs each of us to help take care of it. We need to remember it gives us our food and our water, and with our help, it will stay beautiful. Each small thing, when done together, can make a very big difference to it. As we do this, think about what we might do to be able to help keep it beautiful. If we think back to the story of the sower, we can link it together. If we ignore what is going on around us, we are like the first seeds. We don't even bother trying to do anything. If we think we can help but we don't bother, we're like the second seed that falls on the rocks. We start off well, but then just give up after a while. If you remember, the third seed fell among the weeds. That's a bit like us hearing about the problems and then spend so long worrying about it that we don't do anything about it. But maybe we could be like the seed that falls in the good soil. We may think that because we are so small, we can't do anything, but with each little thing we do, we grow and we grow. And with all the other seeds, we can change the world. This is what God wants us to do, to take care of the most precious gift that he gave us. We have to learn to love his world and all those people in it, to give thanks to him for the harvest that he gives us, and to protect his world for the next generation to enjoy. Our world can be a great big adventure. Sometimes we need to work together to protect it. When we do things to help the world, God is with us. He wants to work through us to protect it. It gives us all our harvest, all the food we need. And we need to give thanks, but we also need to ask ourselves, what can I do to make a difference? With our hands, God can do great things. It might not seem like much, but think of the little boy with the starfish. Think about what would happen if everyone picked up a starfish and threw it back. So, as we celebrate harvest, we give thanks for creation, as well as all that the earth provides for us. And as we go over the next 2 weeks, and we hear an awful lot about all the big meetings that are going on to try and help look at our planet and what we can do to save it, let us think of those people that are making those decisions and actually pray for them that the decisions that they make will help us to protect God's world. Every time you go out and you see a bit of rubbish, maybe pick up that rubbish. Maybe switch off your lights so that they're not on all the time if you're leaving the room. Little bit by little bit, if every one of us did that, God's world would be a greater place to live, and it would be there for generations to come. So that's my challenge to you, is what can you do to make sure that we can celebrate harvest year after year after year, surrounded by the most beautiful world that we've been given. So we're going to end with a song stroke prayer. What I wanted to do was, rather than saying a prayer, I wanted to look at different images of God's world. And rather than having words to that, I'm going to play a piece of music. It's a piece of music that you probably all know. It's from The Greatest Showman. And it talks about walking hand in hand together. Maybe that's hand in hand with our friends, but actually walking hand in hand with God to see the wonders of the world that there is, from the mountains to the seas. So what I want you to do is just be quiet. If you want to sing along, I'm more than happy, but just look at the pictures, look at the images, and actually realise what a beautiful world we do live in.
Some people long for a life that is simple and planned, tied with a ribbon. Some people won't sail the sea 'cause they're safer on land. To follow what's written, but I'd follow you to the great unknown, off to a world we call our own. Hand in my hand and we promise to never let go. We're walking a tightrope, high in the sky we can see the whole world down below. We're walking a tightrope, never sure, never know how far we could fall, but it's all an adventure that comes with a breathtaking view. Walking a tightrope with you. Ooh, 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 ooh. With you. Ooh, with you. Mountains and valleys and all that will come in between. Desert and ocean, you pulled me in, and together grows. Hand in my hand and you promise to never let go. We're walking a tightrope. High in the sky we can see the whole world down below. We're walking a tightrope. Never sure, will you catch me if I should fall? Well, it's all an adventure that comes with a breathtaking view. Walking a tightrope with you. Ooh, 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 ooh. With you. Ooh, ooh, ooh. With you. With you. With you. Oh, with you.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great harvest. I look forward to seeing you hopefully again next term. It's been rather a long time. You guys have been watching me, but it'll be really nice for me to be able to come in and see you guys as well. So have a lovely half term, enjoy your break, and see you all soon. Bye.